Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the latest in our series of the Politicians and the Professionals. I'm Ray Perman, I'm Director of the David Hume Institute, and again we are delighted to have as our partners in this the Royal Society of Edinburgh, the Law Society in Scotland, the Institute and Faculty of Actuaries, and the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Scotland. Tonight we're very pleased to have Jim Murphy, leader of the Labour Party, and we're grateful to Jim because the commitment to come and speak tonight was actually made by his predecessor. And then there was a period when we didn't know who the leader of the Labour Party would be, and we hoped there would be a leader of the Labour Party by the time we came to this evening. And I know that when Jim was elected, his diary immediately filled, so we are grateful for him to honouring this commitment. This evening, the discussion after Jim has spoken will be chaired by Alistair Morris, who is President of the Law Society of Scotland, and without any further remarks from me, I'll hand over to Jim Murphy.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. Sorry I've been a couple of minutes late. I'll get used to this microphone. I'll put it there. And usually when you come to speeches like this, you're introduced with a kind of a eulogy that wouldn't be out of place at your funeral. So that's the most honest introduction I've ever had. Someone had to do it, and we're just glad that the position was filled before this speech had to be given. That's crap. What a great. So I'd like to thank you for that really warm welcome. Like these kind of the kind of job things in politics are always unpredictable. I remember when one of the jobs, and I'm not here, you get loads of politicians who'll spend the night telling you what they used to be rather than what they want to be or what they're going to do. So if I can just fall into that trap for a second, which is that the kind of experience of these reshuffles and what happens in politics is always unpredictable, and I'm only picking up on this theme on the basis of that kind introduction. Is that I remember during one of the reshuffles when, I don't know if you know how this works, but basically those of you who have visited the House of Commons before, you know we vote in division lobbies, kind of long corridors at the side of the debating chamber, and when there's a reshuffle on, everyone keeps their mobile on, right? Well, not everyone. The people who have done a pretty poor job, and think, I'm being told by the BBC to put this way. You don't mind that beaming noise? Okay. Well, that might be good. Depends what I say. The only people who keep their mobiles off are the ministers who've done a pretty rubbish job, because they work out you can't be sacked if you haven't got your phone on. So I was in the division lobby one day on the reshuffle day, and I had my phone on, and a good friend of mine, Caroline Flint, who's on Question Time, I think, tomorrow evening with the First Minister from somewhere in England, which seems to be the only place where Scottish Government ministers do Question Time these days. But Caroline Flint came up to me in the division lobby and said, "Jim, I've just been offered this job. And I don't know whether I should take it." Now, first of all, that misunderstands the nature of a reshuffle, right? Because these things aren't offers; they're kind of take it or leave it deals. And she said, "I don't know whether I should do it." And she told me what it was. I said, "Caroline, that's a cracking job. You should definitely do it." It was the Minister for Labour in the Labour government. And I said, "It's all about inherited disadvantage. It's all about poverty. It's all about changing people's life chances." And she said, "Do you know what, Jim? You've persuaded me. You've convinced me to do it." And she said, you know an awful lot about it, though." And I said, "Yep, Caroline, until this conversation, I was the Minister for Employment." So that's even worse, and I'm glad some numbskull was willing to do the job before tonight. And that's how I lost my job as a Minister for Labour in the last Labour government. My phone went a wee while later and I got offered something else, obviously even better. Well, that's what I said in the press release when I accepted it. Anyway, what I'm here to do is to talk about a job that Caroline Flint took off of me. and some of the issues associated with it. And it's really kind of you, genuinely kind of you, to have made it's kind actually to create the intellectual space for people to think and argue aloud. Because one of the things I notice, and this isn't meant to be dismissive at all, is that sometimes the space in Scotland for original thinking or creative thought is squeezed. And if anything, my reflection would be that Scotland has to in a contemporary way honour that heritage of the Enlightenment, in a sense that there's an ideas factory and the kind of flamboyancy and occasionally eccentric idea thought aloud. So I think this series of speeches is really very important. But what I wanted to do is set out my ideas about how the Scottish Labour Party and this Scottish Labour Party leader would seek to achieve a more fair and prosperous Scotland. And as I said earlier, I don't think we have enough think tank space to elucidate some of those ideas, and I think sometimes the debate in Scotland is poorer for it. But what I want to do is to set out how inequality represents the biggest moral, social and economic challenge to Scotland, and more than reflecting on the damage that it caused, set out what I would do to address it. And in setting out how to tackle that inequality through reform, through redistribution and a renewed sense of focus on productivity and growth in the Scottish economy. My case is that Scotland flourishes when the people and families of Scotland flourish, that Scottish businesses do well when their workers do well, and that greater equality isn't just a goal of a prosperous economy, but rather a prerequisite for it. Working people in Scotland no longer have confidence in many cases that if they work hard, they will be rewarded for it properly. Too many businesses and too many workers are stuck in the same low-skill, low-wage trap that neither works for them as a company nor for their employees. I have spoken in previous speeches about how the transfer of substantial financial and spending powers to Holyrood, making our devolved parliament the most devolved parliament in the world, means there is no excuse for our political leaders to talk about fairness, then not take the action to create a more prosperous and more passionate society, where people get a fair outcome for doing the right thing by themselves and by their families. So tonight, I don't want to just simply talk in terms of economic prosperity and social justice being compatible. Politicians from all political stripes can and indeed have made that argument. That argument makes us sound good, often makes us feel content, but it costs nothing and leads to absolutely nowhere if it's just words. I want to talk about the real political choices that make creating a fair economy here in Scotland genuinely possible. I want to begin by reflecting on 3 ideas and then go on to talk about 3 specific policy areas. The 3 ideas are that inequality is morally wrong. Secondly, that inequality is corrosive to the values of our society. And thirdly, inequality is holding back our economy, and tackling it is in our own selfish interests. So, firstly, on inequality being morally wrong, the number I have in my head when reflecting on this is number 10. No, not the number 10 of that famous street in London, but today, the top 10% now earn more than 10 times what the bottom 10% earn. And that has knocked nearly 10 percentage points off economic growth over the last 2.5 decades. That has cost Scotland billions. I'll leave it to the economists in the room to debate just how much, but losing nearly 10 percentage points from Scotland's economy has cost our country. But I will argue that the distribution of resources in our economy and society is inefficient and harms our nation's economics, but more than that, it's just unfair as well. I see it as my mission to put those missing billions back into Scotland and Scotland's economy. Disadvantage, as we know, now cascades down the generations in our great country. And it is simply wrong that Scotland is still a country where the opportunities that many of our young people have in their lives is determined by their social background. A generation ago, when I went to school on a scheme in the south side of Glasgow, back then the idea for me and my friends of going to university just really didn't come up. And sadly, that's still true for too many Scots today. A generation later, too many kids from my background still have to rely on luck to get on in life. And for reasons that we all understand, we have a sense of conceit in Scotland about our education system. Yes, we have many great schools and colleges, and some of the best universities in the world, and that is something to be proud of. But that pride can never be satisfaction with the status quo. Not when so many youngsters from working class communities in Scotland are being left behind, plain and simple. Only 1 in 5 of the poorest kids in Scotland achieved 5 or more credit qualifications at the end of 4th year in 2013. That 1 in 5 compares to 3 in 5 for children from the wealthiest backgrounds. Now, I'm not against folk from those wealthiest backgrounds doing brilliantly. I just think others should have that chance as well, because my politics is driven by a sense of working class parents having the chance to have middle class kids. But those figures looked at another way. It's just 220 of the poorest 9,000 children in Scotland achieved the 3 higher A grades needed to get into our best universities. I'll say that again, just 220 kids from poor families in the whole of Scotland get those grades that get them a chance to go to our best universities. Just 1 in 40. Or put it another way, it's the equivalent of, in some classes, not a single student obtaining those qualifications. 220, that's only a little more than the number of people in this room. In the whole of Scotland, amongst the poorest families. That's unacceptable. It's immoral. We can't accept that level of disadvantage anymore, passed from one generation to another generation. And the evidence suggests, and we can debate this evening, but the evidence suggests that the situation isn't improving. The international education rankings show that a decline in our relative international standing and no real change in the attainment gap in a serious way. The number of young people that are not in education, employment or in training remains stubbornly high at around 30,000 in Scotland, and numeracy levels are falling at every level. We all know that poor education leaves long-lasting scars. The kids who have poor education go on to have poorer health, less highly paid jobs, and of course, poorer wealth in the long term. It is wrong that the prosperous live 9 years longer than the poorest, but that is what's happening in our country, and we shouldn't tolerate it or look the other way. It is wrong that someone is 1.5 times more likely to die of a heart attack in the poorer areas. It is wrong that the poorest are 7 times more likely to be admitted to hospital because of alcohol abuse, and 16 times more likely because of drug abuse. It is wrong that the poor are 3 times more likely to take their own lives. Inequality isn't just immoral. It undermines people's belief that we live in a society that is fair. It corrodes that sense of rules and norms that underpin many of our daily lives. And it's not enough for politicians and others to simply reflect on that. It comes in my profession with the responsibility to act upon it. So the second idea that I want to explore is that inequality is corrosive to our society. We all have an idea of Scotland as a fair nation. 2 centuries ago, Burns wrote, "It's hardly in a body's power to keep at times from being sour, to see how things are shared." So on Monday, the Glasgow Herald front page reported on a new study from the TUC. It found that wages had fallen by more than £1,800 in real terms over the last 5 years. Surely that offends our shared sense of fairness in our society. These are people who go out to work. These are people who sense the dignity of work. These are people who understand the civilising nature of work, and yet many of them are £1,800 a year worse off. There is now compelling evidence, I would argue, that the more unequal a society is, the less trust we have in one another. I recognise the sentiment expressed by Burns 2 centuries ago when I was talking to a man in the East End of Glasgow 2 days ago. He wanted to share with me his anger at the way things worked. I was out canvassing in the East End of Glasgow on behalf of the Labour Party. He had a lot of specifics. He wanted to work and he couldn't find enough hours to work. He struggled with his debts. He couldn't get access to affordable credit and had to turn to exorbitant rates or moneylenders. He worried that he was letting his kids down but wondered how he could work any harder. I'll put it far more politely than he did when summing up his sentiment and his predicament. My interpretation of his sentiment was that something is fundamentally wrong with the way things are working. Now, he put it more colloquially in a way that I don't want to share with the audience this evening, but that was the sense of his frustration. But that feeling, informed by his bitter experience, for him as an individual, is shared by all too many. That they're not getting a fair share in our economy is undermining the core precepts of our society. That you get out what you put in. That work is rewarded, that if you do the responsible thing, you and your family will do okay. Many parents, all too many parents, now believe that their children will do worse than them. Just a quarter of parents believe that their kids will be better off than they currently are. And that concern for the future, often now replaced by a directionless anger and the rise of political populism, is a new and dangerous feature of our society. So turning to the third theme of my argument, which is that inequality is holding back our economy. It has long been intuitively obvious that inequality is economically inefficient. When the opportunity to succeed is denied to individuals, it also means opportunity denied to our economy. Inequality of opportunity means economic waste. Many have put it in their own eloquent way. Warren Buffett put it better than almost anyone else. Allowing economic success to be determined by a parent's background is like, and I quote him, choosing the 2020 Olympic team by picking the eldest sons of the gold medal winners of the 2000 Olympics. A decade ago, the Blair government effectively ended the idea that hereditary privilege should exist in our legislature. In the future, we should look at economic opportunity and wonder why it was ever so heavily determined by who came before us in our own individual family's history. Children denied educational opportunity don't just miss out on a more prosperous, fulfilling, and happier life. They fail to reach their economic potential. And so every one of us misses out on a more productive, creative individual who can change our country for the better. So as we deal with the deficit, Scotland simply cannot afford the cost of economic failure of those individuals. Over the next 30 years, we will have 500,000 more pensioners in Scotland. Our ageing population, ageing faster than the rest of the UK, means that we need to nurture the full economic potential of every person of working age without exception. When income and wealth are held by those who already enjoy high levels of income and wealth, spending is often withheld from the economy. People on relatively low incomes, like the gentleman I met in the East End of Glasgow, people on those relatively low incomes have a higher propensity to spend, as we know, often driven by necessity. But when poorer consumers have more income, the multiplier effect is particularly important in our economy. With 65% of the UK economy based in consumer spending, far higher than, for example, in France and Germany, where the figure is closer to 55%. So here, lower consumption due to unequal distribution of income has a bigger economic impact for us all. For so long, the debate, as we all know, has been about whether trickle-down economics works. My argument tonight is a different one, which is it's clear that a lack of resources amongst the people at the bottom is hindering growth. Inequality holds us all back. That inequality is, I now believe, the single biggest issue in our economics. In the developing world, rapid growth in many economies has left societies deeply divided between a new prosperous middle class and the rest. So this problem isn't unique to Scotland. In some parts of Latin America, there is some evidence that economic growth has begun to close inequality. But everywhere in the developing world, we see tensions created as those who feel left behind as global wealth increases, in places with that hopelessness spills over into anger and makes all of our world less secure. So in the developed world, over the last century, we saw the rapid increase in inequality as we industrialised, only for the spoils of the economy to be more equally shared over time, as we know. However, what is causing concern today is that the inequality is rising again, causing people to question whether we are returning to an economic model closer to the early growth of capitalism rather than the more egalitarian situation of the mid-20th century. Interestingly, in the developed world, the debate is now being dominated by talk of inequality. Last summer, I don't know what you read when you were on holiday, but last summer, copies of Capital in the 21st Century, a translation of a 700-page French economic treaty, was the #1 bestseller list. Preferred as beach reading above 50 Shades of Grey. This winter, the great and the good, arriving by private jet at their annual gathering in the snows of Davos, picked inequality as their theme. In the last few months, the IMF, the OECD, the Institute of Directors and the CBI have all warned that inequality is holding back our economy. What I'm glad to say is that this now belatedly, increasingly crowded field of debate, it was welcomed by people like myself who have been discussing this for some time and who have been on this political terrain for decades. I'm less interested in arguing whether it's Thomas Piketty or Joe Stiglitz who have captured the true nature of the global economy and its challenge. As Marx put it, it's not just about the debate. And with apologies to David Hume and apologies to New Labour for quoting Marx, the philosophers, and this is a quote from Marx, the philosophers have only interpreted the world in various ways. The point is to change it. And people are desperate for change, for a sense that their lives will be easier, but more importantly, that their children will enjoy a better standard of life, with more opportunities than they themselves enjoyed. So as I said at the beginning of the speech, I want to talk about the political decisions that we need to make now. We can't have this sort of policy radicalism on the cheap. Scots are tired of listening to politicians of all sorts of political hues setting out a lofty vision of a more equal Scotland, but then failing to deliver because we aren't prepared to make the difficult choices. I think that's particularly acute at the moment. So I want to set out 3 particular policy areas where there needs to be action to address some of the inequality that I've already spoken about. First, what economists would call before-tax interventions. Structural change to the way the economy works to ensure fairer outcomes for more people. Second, after-tax interventions, using redistribution to tackle where our economy is failing those people who work hard. And thirdly, and most importantly, ensuring faster growth and greater productivity. So firstly, on those before-tax measures, the last Labour government had a good record in tackling poverty and inequality. I know others will debate that, but both absolute and relative poverty amongst children and pensioners fell. These were hard-won gains and were expensive, with £18 billion more a year spent on support for families and £11 billion more a year spent in support of pensioners, particularly the poorest pensioners. But more needs to be done now to deal with the underlying causes of unequal rewards within our economy. Too many people feel that the link between prosperity of Scotland and the prosperity of their family has been broken. Today, the real terms drop in income has been accompanied by structural shifts in our labour market, which have increased people's insecurity. The number of workers earning less than the living wage has increased. Half the growth in jobs since 2010 have come from those low-paid jobs. The numbers of working part-time because they cannot get what they want, which is full-time work, have increased. Of course, flexibility has its benefits for companies and also for workers, but the exploitation that creates insecurity has to be stopped. Many workers do have full-time hours, but they still find that they have too little security as they're on zero-hour contracts. The Scottish TUC estimates that there are now 84,000 of our fellow Scots on zero-hour contracts in Scotland today. So today's labour market statistics are welcome, and the good news for those who are finding work anew. But they also showed an increase in the temporary working and part-time working amongst those who are desperate for full-time jobs. This insecurity makes it more difficult to balance the books with weaker tax revenues from workers and higher government spending through tax credits and social security to make up for that low pay. So when people have decent wages and feel secure at work, they can spend more, and that in turn creates more jobs. Our plan, Labour's plan, is to grow our economy by backing those working people. It is admittedly an entirely different way of doing things. So we will raise the minimum wage and we'll use the power of government to promote a living wage, including through procurement, and we will ban exploitative zero-hour contracts. Ban practices that abuse migrant labour to undercut wages, such as those recruitment agencies that only hire overseas workers. Turning to those second policy areas, the after-tax measures. For as long as the rewards from the economy are unevenly spread, we need to also take what economists call those after-tax measures to tackle inequality. I don't seek redistribution out of some sort of political or economic envy at what the few at the top have, because we all pay the price for the missed opportunities by the many at the near bottom, and that, rather than envy, is what drives me. There has long been an argument over whether redistribution damages economic growth by damaging the incentives in the economy. The OECD now argue that the evidence is that this isn't the case. But as we redistribute, we have a responsibility to target spending where it has the most impact. Our approach is to focus spending on the things in Scotland that are holding our people and our economy back: education, health, and job opportunities. So to tackle poor education, we propose that for a measure that some people will find unpopular. We will use some of the proceeds of the 50 pence top rate of tax, raised on incomes over £150,000, to spend that money on educational disadvantage. We all know, but our policies don't reflect, that the richest brains are sometimes locked behind the doors of the poorest homes. Many of the engineers, the entrepreneurs and inventors of the future are grown up in Pollock, Coatbridge and in Craigmillar. They just don't know it yet. It's our job to help them realise their potential. And for that to happen, we need to radically change Scotland. And that's what I plan to do if I was First Minister. So we begin by identifying those 20 secondary schools in the country where the poorest kids are being failed the most. In these schools, teachers often do an amazing job in the most challenging of circumstances, but our focus has to be on the outcomes of the children who have been let down by the system. So the 20 schools will be a combination of those schools where educational disadvantage means poor results, but also those schools with good academic records, but where too many of the poor kids are slipping through the net unnoticed. I would double the number of classroom assistants in the primary schools associated with those secondary schools. I would introduce chartered status for teachers to attract more of the best talent to these schools, teaching disadvantaged kids. I want to create a centre for national excellence across Scotland so schools can learn from one another and share that best practice. And I want to transform the 20 poorest schools into places of community learning and opportunity where the parents can learn as well as their children. We know it's the case that many of the mums, in particular for whom the educational responsibility of sharing in the homework at home, cannot themselves meet the challenge faced by their children in their homework. I think in my own experience, and I'm sure this won't get on television because I don't talk about my family in the media, but just privately I would say this, is that we've got 3 kids, and I don't mind not being able to do my 16-year-old's maths. I really don't. I don't feel embarrassed. And my daughter enjoys kind of having a laugh at my expense. Sometimes I find it a little bit embarrassing that I'm sometimes challenged by my 14-year-old son's biology lessons or physics lessons. It's still the case that there's nothing my 10-year-old brings home from primary school that I can't help him with. But we know the truth, that there are many families who, yes, can't help with the 16-year-old and can't help with the 14-year-old, but many mums cannot help their 10-year-old to learn. And that's why we would transform some of these schools into hubs of community learning so the mum can learn. The mum for whom this responsibility falls, the mum can learn, as well as the father, if that's the nature of the family, but with a priority on mothers learning so they can learn in partnership with their children. And of course, there are examples. There are great, inspiring examples of schools and local authorities in the face of real financial constraints doing remarkable things to ensure that children aren't left behind. Earlier this week, when I visited Sandaig Primary School, which Glasgow City Council has designated as a nurture school, where they help kids with various communication issues to integrate better with their peers and get more out of their education. I met kids there, and it's none of your background is none of my business, but I met children there whose backgrounds I couldn't imagine having to experience or live through. I met a young girl whose mother and father had both killed themselves within 3 weeks. Within 3 weeks, having lost both parents, not to a dreadful accident, but to suicide of both their parents. Now, unless there's an intervention as such there is at Sandaig Primary School, what will happen to that child? What will become of her? So that work in that school is an example of inspiring practice that we should seek to replicate because it changes lives and has a potential to change lives in a remarkable way. So going beyond education and tackling those second issues that will drive that sense of opportunity, I want to mention health more briefly. Because a second difficult choice, actually, politics is a series of easy choices. We talk about difficult choices, they aren't tough at all. I mean, tough means unpopular sometimes, but it doesn't make them tough. It makes them honest, and it makes them direct, and it makes them open. It means it's not just warm words, so I'll continue to use the politician's phrase. The second tough choice is about increasing a tax on homes worth over £2 million and using the money to spend on the National Health Service. Because in the debate on inequality, we often focus on poor life expectancy. But Scotland, we know, has a huge problem with poor, healthy life expectancy, and I'll talk about what I mean. It's not just the terrible human cost of ill health and early death. Our poor health record means disadvantaged families are further held back as working days are lost. So our aim has to be not just to increase life expectancy, but to increase healthy life expectancy. We can see the crisis in our A&E and the problems in social care that our NHS is already feeling the strain. With a population in Scotland that is ageing faster than the rest of the UK, the pressure is only going to grow. This has been happening at a time when in Scotland we haven't been increasing health spending as quickly as it currently is in England. So we have to address that as well, and we will through this mansion tax and redistributing that income. And the third measure on redistribution is to tackle that third driver of inequality and poor life chances, that aspect of poor job prospects. We propose to use a tax on the bonuses in the financial services sector and to use the proceeds to give young people the guarantee of a job or training. We'll have more to say on this in the next few days, but we know that there is a strong scarring effect, as I've alluded to, on young people who experience unemployment. Youth unemployment has a knock-on effect on adult employment as young people lose confidence, experience and skills, which are very difficult to catch up on. In truth, we need a far greater focus on dealing with long-term, intergenerational poverty. Families who in previous downturns were not properly equipped to deal with the opportunities of the next upturn. But this time we must do it better with more targeted help for those people to get back into the labour market. That's why I want to see the Department for Work and Pensions work programme devolve to local areas so that we can match employment support to the economies of local communities. And the third area that I wanted to speak about, I spoke earlier about before tax, after tax, and the third one was economic growth. The most successful, and I don't think we say this often enough in politics, and certainly not politics on the left, or for those who pretend to be on the left. The most successful anti-poverty strategy isn't just good intention or moral indignation, but instead it's a successful and growing economy. Simply redistributing income isn't enough. We need a faster growing economy and greater productivity for the problem of inequality will simply grow. It is obvious that we need a growing economy generating wealth and tax revenues to enable us to tackle the unfairness that I've focused upon. What is less well understood in the political debate is the need to grow differently in order to tackle the root causes of inequality. Productivity in our economy is falling behind the rest of the G7. While productivity is too low, companies will struggle to raise pay, and many will compete on low skills and on low pay. Governments will be left trying to correct imbalances in the economy rather than dealing with them at source. So in Scotland, we have rightly celebrated our comparative advantage in energy, biosciences, financial services, education, whisky, culture, creative industries, and much more besides. And as the growing middle class passes 1 billion in number, we specialise in many of the things they will want to buy, and we are well placed to grow. Some sectors are able to make long-term strategic decisions to raise productivity and take advantage of emerging opportunities. Whisky, even though I'm teetotal, whisky, I'm happy to say, is a great example where billions are being invested now and 30 new distilleries are being opened in anticipation of these new consumers. In other areas, including energy and education, government needs to be more strategic to take more of a lead to ensure they maintain our celebrated competitive advantage. The biggest factor that will differentiate the Scottish economy over the next decades from the last 40 years will be Scotland's time as an oil economy coming to near an end. Looking beyond the short-term challenges of low oil prices in the North Sea, we know we are entering a prolonged period when oil fields will come offline and production will decline. In this period, we should firstly support the high-value engineering jobs that must outlive oil in the North Sea, and second, to ensure that just as we are leaders in subsea exploration, now we become world leaders in international decommissioning. As the Brent field begins its decommissioning, we need to urgently work to ensure that the clean-up of the North Sea generates jobs for Scotland's North East. And by keeping the Barnett formula, a key general election difference between ourselves and the current Scottish Government, who would replace Barnett with the uncertainty of fiscal autonomy, Scotland will be protected from the fiscal impact of uncertainty over oil. So beyond taking that maximum advantage of decommissioning, we need a new national debate about how we substitute oil jobs, especially in Aberdeen and in Shetland. We know that we have, in the conclusion, we know that we have world-class universities in Scotland that no other small country can match. I've spoken about how we need to ensure that more of our young people from different backgrounds should have the chance to get on in life and get into those great institutions. The scientific innovations at these universities must be better supported, starting with a stronger focus on science and technology in our schools. Our flagship industries cannot do this alone. I know that. It's partnership with government and others, because beyond our leading successes, we have to support small and medium-sized industries to grow and be more productive. That means government investing in rather than cutting back on skills, as has happened in Scotland over the last few years. We need more start-up businesses and more graduates choosing to work for themselves. Currently, less than 1% of Scotland's graduates leaving our universities start by employing themselves. So it means investing in long-delayed infrastructure projects that have on occasion become a national embarrassment to Scotland, and it means a focus and devolving economic power down to local areas, especially to our cities, so that those cities and those communities can do more to control their own resources and can throw everything they have at supporting enterprise in their local economies. So despite the big challenges that I've spoken about, I am optimistic about our country. We face enormous challenges as a nation. The challenge to our oil economy, an ageing population, greater competition from developing economies, low productivity in our national economy, and personal insecurity in our personal economy. Alongside that genuine sense of grievance about inequality. But I am optimistic because the opportunities open to us are at least equal to those challenges. Every month, the world's population grows by the equivalent of Scotland's population. That's the population of Aberdeen each and every single day. What a remarkable opportunity for our industries. Hundreds of millions more customers for the things that we do well. The opportunity for greater prosperity, which we can all again share in. We know what works. We know how to ensure that more of us share in that prosperity. We just need the leadership to help make the right decisions. Scotland works best when our economy works for all Scots. That should be our aim, and that will be my work each and every day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jim. As Ray said at the outset, my name is Alistair Morris. I'm the President of the Scottish Law Society, and we are very pleased to be part of the sponsorship of this series of lectures. That was a fantastically interesting opening speech from Jim Murphy. For those of you who are old hands at this, we will now open the floor to questions. I'll take 2 or 3 at a time. I anticipate that there will be many questions given a packed room, so I would appreciate it if you'd keep the questioning as short as possible. And using my prerogative as being chair, if you don't mind, I'll go first. Jim, you explained quite a lot about your ambitions to have a more equal economy and a more equal society in Scotland. And inevitably that has to be paid for in some transfer of wealth. I was interested in some of the comments you made about before tax intervention and after tax intervention, but particularly on financial services, which is a key employer and industry in Scotland. You're focused on them and a tax on bonuses. How does that fit in with the sort of growth of the Scottish economy when it is currently a big driver in the Scottish economy and might be under threat because of policies such as that?
Okay. A short answer, because I've spoken too much already and I listened to the audience as well. Thank you for sharing the Q&A. My sense is that we have remarkable advantages in terms of financial services, and despite the knocks since 2008, it remains a remarkable kind of national asset here in Scotland, financial services. It's simply this. I'm not willing to increase the taxes on the middle classes. That kind of mainstream middle class, I'm not willing to increase taxes on them. And therefore that gets you to other places in terms of additional sources of income. There are other politicians who are going to say, tell Scotland that we can spend more and cut all your taxes. It just doesn't work that way. You all know that. I mean, it's tempting to vote for politicians who'll tell you that. But when you put the cross in that box, you know it's entirely wishful thinking. But on the basis that I'm not going to increase, the Labour Party isn't going to increase the taxes on the mainstream middle class, and nor are we going to increase the council tax, it then takes you to other places in terms of source of income. And I think a tax on bonus, those bankers' bonuses, is a fairer way of doing it than increasing the taxes on the middle class. I do know that some people will be dissatisfied with that, I know that. But I think the strength that we have in scale in Edinburgh, and even more so, I suspect, I know in London, but in other centres across the UK, London and Edinburgh will remain, I think, remarkable places for the financial services industry to prosper. I don't think, and there's no sense, that this tax would have the type of impact that I know that lies behind the question that you ask.
Okay, I'll take questions from the floor. If you wouldn't mind saying who you are before you ask the question. One at the front. Anybody else ready? And one on the left. Sir. There's a microphone there.
Jim, your heart's obviously in a very good place, but is this not pie-in-the-sky economics where politicians promise everything? You can have jobs, you can have real salaries. I mean, if you look what's happened everywhere in the world, every economy through Europe, this has come through immensely well in comparison. And is it not wrong just to promise things you as a politician cannot click your fingers and deliver? I mean, Keynes would say in a difficult time like a depression, you have to have some real wage flexibility. My wages have gone down since 2006 in real terms. Good, because that's what's keeping other people in work. And I'd be far worse off in Spain or Greece or whatever. So isn't it dangerous to promise too much?
Okay. Who are you?
Chris Carr.
Okay, Chris, my heart's in the same place as yours. May not sound it by the question, but it's biologically it's in the same place.
Take the second question.
Hi, Jim. Anton Kallela, the Chief Executive of ICAS.
And you're a constituent, so no questions about why your bins aren't being emptied, Anton.
Jim, that was a very powerful and impassioned apologia and vision for the future. And I get it. I mean, as a child who grew up in the East End of Glasgow, in a real area of deprivation, I get a lot of that. But part of the challenge, Jim, and I understand about equality and levelling and targeting those who are wealthier to support. But I wonder, Jim, if part of the challenge also here is not just the poverty and the inequality, but also a poverty of aspiration.
Absolutely.
And part of the challenge, Jim, that maybe you need to put to everybody here, and many wealth creators here, and those who may be unnerved by what you say, is that what you're saying is there's a collective aspiration here that you want to create jobs, that you want businesses to thrive in Scotland and grow in Scotland. And I know I'm making as much a comment as a question, but Jim, I wonder if in the desire for equality, you need to be careful that we don't have an inequality of aspiration here, when we want everybody collectively to create a very, very enterprising country that will give these people work and jobs that will allow them to fulfill their potential and then grow and achieve themselves.
Jim?
Okay. Picking up. Chris, look, I'm not promising what we can deliver. I made 3 particular spending commitments, all 3 of which are costed an identified source of income. It's not the type of, don't worry, it'll be okay, oil will always stay at $110 a barrel type of promise. Right? It's not that type of thing that we were promised in September. It's something entirely different. It is that we'll invest in the National Health Service on a tax on a mansion tax. It might be crudely named, but we could say it's a tax on houses worth over £2 million across the United Kingdom. It's not as snappy a title, but so it's a mansion tax. Now, that is a redistribution of wealth south to north, because the initial thing, about £170 million of that would come to Scotland. We have said how we'd spend the first 29 million of it, which is in 1,000 new nurses in the NHS. Now, there are less than 1,000 homes in Scotland that would be affected by this tax. So there's already more nurses in the NHS from this tax in Scotland than there are houses affected, and we've spent only a tiny proportion of it. The job guarantee for young people is on the tax that I've already mentioned. And on the educational inequality to support those schools that have been let down, we've said as well that'll be through the 50p tax rate that we're committed to across the UK. Because it's up to you whether you think it's no big thing or no bad thing if your wage went down. As a politician, and I'm not having a go at you, Chris, but my constituency for the first time in its history got a food bank a year ago. A big proportion of those people in that food bank go to work, but they don't earn enough to feed their children. And I'm not saying you support that, Chris, and I'm not. You get politicians who do that, kind of point at a member of the audience and say, you can't defend that. But politicians have a public policy duty to say whether they're comfortable or not with the type of thing where people go to work and they can't afford to feed their children. And actually, politicians have a public policy duty that even those people who don't conform to the conditions on receipt of benefit and they get sanctioned, they still should be able to feed their children. And so my constituency is one of the richest in Scotland, and yet there's a food bank. And all across so many of our big cities there are multiple food banks. So while for some people it hasn't been a difficulty, it's been an inconvenience, for the wages to be frozen or to be reduced. For others, it's just been a matter of the nature of how they can live their life, and having to rely on charity from others is nothing that any of us would want to do. I just don't think any of the rest of our fellow human beings should do so. Anton, your point about you're right, Anton. My argument this evening hasn't been just about the traditional sense of altruism, which has often been the argument that people in politics seek to make. I'm trying to combine an argument of altruism and progressive self-interest. I'm saying that our country cannot afford the continued cost and consequence of this degree of inequality. with the ageing population, with the nature of international competition, this is a pretty dumb economic policy, as well as a socially unjust approach in the way in which we organise a society. We either deal with this now, or we'll reflect in years to come why we didn't, and how did we lose competitive advantage. And it's because of this inequality and the drag that it causes. And I think there's a lot in what you say about this aspiration point, because every parent loves their child. There's nothing they wouldn't do for their child. But the kind of sense of poverty of ambition in some households, they don't realise it. I'm not criticising any parent at all, but not every parent. Some parents just, there is not a culture in many families where there's a challenge of there's inherited poverty of ambition, of wealth, of expectation. There's often a limit, a kind of public show of affection and all those sorts of things, all of which contributes to the sense of self for these youngsters, who then go to schools surrounded by others who are often in a similar circumstance. So it genuinely is, as you say, it's about aspiration. But it's about, for me, it's the inherited disadvantage. I'll finish responding to Anton's point with this, is that my argument, as I said at the start, is that, actually I said towards the end, not at the start, is that politicians should actually have my speech the other way around, but I wanted to make an impact by making the case for social justice first, is that politicians, particularly those on the left and in the Labour Party, should be clear that the first part of social justice and inequality is about how you grow the economy, because you cannot redistribute what you don't have. So this more jobs, more prosperity, more success in our economy is the number one prerequisite of being able to do the type of things that my heart and Chris's heart would like to see us do. And to try and deal with this inherited disadvantage that passes from one generation to the other. Because the NHS thing is a redistribution of wealth from the south to the north. And we often, I spoke about this to someone else the other in the week, is that we often talk about the north-south divide. We don't talk enough about the east-west divide in some of our cities. And we can talk about that if time allows us evening, but we all know the kind of reason the Industrial Revolution prevailing wins and who would live where in which cities. But some communities are still scarred by the economic development of the Industrial Revolution and haven't budged.
Okay, some heartfelt responses there. Any more questions, please?
I'll give you shorter answers.
Lady, and then two ladies on the left, or my left.
I'm Kathleen Leslie. I'm a teacher in Fife, and maybe not so much a question, but it's also a comment when we were talking about education and the need for more classroom assistants in some of the poorer schools. The school that I work in, I wouldn't say was what would be defined as a poorer school. However, we have shortages of classroom assistants. We have teachers, for example, who are on temporary contracts, teachers who are basically supply teachers from the one year end to the next. And at the same time, we're being told by the council that we're going to have to make around £70 million of cuts over the next couple of years, cutting PE specialists, cutting art specialists, music specialists. These are all things that, when you talk about children maybe from poorer backgrounds who are in poverty, these are the sorts of things that benefit them greatly. But all we're hearing about at the moment is that there will be more and more cuts. So I guess, it's partly a comment, but also how that can be changed. Because, for us as teachers, it's a huge concern. £70 million in a time when we're already struggling to even have budgets for photocopying of basic resources. So, yeah.
Okay.
There's a lady behind.
Yes, my name is Verena Griffin von Rödern. I'm the German Consul General. I think you rightly focused to tackle inequality, even though I'm not 100% sure if it's the most important thing to put mothers in the position to help their children, because the few times my mother tried to help me, we always quarreled, and it was mainly about the pronunciation in English, because she was an au pair girl in England and corrected my pronunciation. Another thing which worked very well in Germany, though, she helped particularly Turkish kids with their homeworks when she was an elderly lady. That's one thing which worked very well in Germany, that a lot of retired people volunteer to sort of help with homework with kids. But I mainly was struck by the fact also that you never mentioned languages. You talked about the importance of science and technology. You know, there is a lot of tourists in this country. Germany is one of the most important export markets, but we see that German as a foreign language is slowly disappearing, and we are really worried about that. There are over 100 million mother tongue speakers of German in the EU, and I think to do business, you better speak the language of your business partner.
You've got a short list of one, haven't you, on this language skills class? Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay. I'll give shorter answers. And the response to the German Consul General. I mean, my mother always tried to help me with my homework, and everything I ever did. She still gives me advice today. If she was here, she'd be giving me you pardon?
My mother is 92 and she would still give me advice, yes?
I've never minded my mother's advice except when I'm playing football. That's the only. She comes along and shouts at me, still playing football. That's the kind of. There's a couple of journalists in the room. That'll end up in some diary somewhere. Anyway, your point about languages is a fair one, and we got as we expect to export to this growing global middle class. I mean, like part of that will be dependent on being bilingual. I learned German. For 2 years, 3 years actually. I found it productive. I learned what in reflection was a pointless language for 6 years, which was Afrikaans in South Africa. But this idea of language skills is important, not just in terms of commerce, but also it's an export. I mean, for our universities and colleges, it can be an important export. A real growth. And there's already some great examples of that, and we should do more. On Catherine's point about teachers, I don't know the detail of which school you're in, Fife and everything else, but there is an issue about long-term supply, and where people are about to come to the end of what the 2 years period? 2 years.
Quite often teachers will be in a school for a year, even longer than that, with no contract.
Mm-hmm. But quite often people will get to the end, just on the horizon of their 2 year period, and they'll no longer be needed. But they've been there for 23 months as supply teachers, because obviously not everyone will know this, but after the 2 years as supply teacher, you'll acquire rights at work and a permanency. So there are things happening there. I know that about long-term supply. I think, Catherine, this might sound a kind of dull answer, but it's my truth, is that we've had a council tax that people are largely supportive of, but that's created a pressure in local authorities at a time local authorities are having less money at a time when they've been expected to do more. So one of the things that Scottish politics, I think, most people will be aware, is when through the Smith Commission, where there's been about the allocation of power between the UK Parliament and the Scottish Parliament, and over time, or very quick time, I'd like to see the power out of the Scottish Parliament and into Scottish communities. But we've had a Smith Commission about where does power lie, and then resources flow alongside that. I'd like us to have a similar approach to how we organise local authorities. Is that what is the function of a local authority? I mean, at the moment, there's an A&E crisis. Part of the pressure is social care, because many of particularly the older people, the hospital's done as much as can be done, but there's nowhere for them to go. They can't go home unsupported, and there's nowhere else for them to go. So there are real pressures on local authorities, partly driven by the council tax freeze. So rather than saying I would increase the council tax, I'm not going to do that, as I'd like to have an honest conversation about what's the role of local government, what should it fund, and where should the responsibility for some of the thing lie in a national, a UK or a Scottish government context. But if there are particular things in your school, your MSP or your MP is maybe someone you should talk to.
Okay, more questions? In the middle and at the left. Graham.
Graham Watson, could I invite you to consider, in terms of your national health agenda, perhaps redirecting some budget towards sport and leisure? I'm a director of North Lanarkshire Leisure Trust, one of the largest and most successful trusts in one of the least prosperous and poorest health parts of Scotland. From a standing start 6 years ago, we now have 48,000 people in North Lanarkshire who pay a direct debit to access our sport and leisure facilities. budget into further improving the already good health, sport and leisure facilities in Scotland, particularly after last year, that would be something that would be easy to consider and possibly quite beneficial.
There was somebody on the left.
Alan Alexander, General Secretary, Royal Society of Edinburgh. Two questions, very short, about the before tax issues. First of all, Jim, how do you define the middle class who will be immune from tax increases? I think that was extremely vague. And secondly,
That wasn't me.
well, it wasn't me either, honest. And secondly, why don't you consider, rather than the mansion tax, an increase in the number of council tax bands and a re-evaluation of where the boundaries are between the bands? Because there's developing evidence that that would be a much more buoyant and continuing source of revenue than the mansion tax.
Okay. Sorry, because the microphone exploded when you put it in your hand, I didn't get your name. I am sorry. Alan. Sorry, Alan. Okay. Like Graham's point about sport and leisure and the impact, the preventative impact on health. I might not look it, but I try and keep fit. I go running 6 days a week. And I did an interview with Emily Maitlis on Newsnight a couple of weeks ago where I admitted, while I was out doing an interview in the Glasgow snow, I admitted that I usually go running between midnight and 2 in the morning because it's the only time I can get the time to do so. Run marathons, play football. So I'm personally absolutely convinced of the merit, as a public policy merit, the type of things that you're talking about, Graham. I don't know enough about the North Lanarkshire Trust, but on the basis of those numbers of people who are financially contributing to your trust, I am going to become an expert in what's happening in the North Lanarkshire Trust. Because I said earlier, we've spent 29 million. We've only committed 29 million of the 170 additional million that this mansion tax would bring in. There's additional measures on tobacco that we're introducing that would add to that. So I don't know if we'll have time at the end of this evening, but at some point I'd love to find out and maybe even come and visit. And it's a wider point about health as well. I mean, quite often, and for understandable reasons, health is about ambulances and A&E, and it's wider than that. In terms of the agenda we're having this evening, in terms of business productivity and social justice, it's much wider than that. For example, mental health. We lose many, many more days because of fluctuating mental health conditions in Scotland than we do because of strikes or industrial action. And we don't, I'll take a share of the blame on this. I don't really mind in terms of sharing the responsibility here, because I think it's all politicians have got to talk more publicly and be more active about workplace mental health and societal stigma of mental health. We'll all know, I suspect we all know someone who's experienced an element of fluctuating mental health and seen it happen to them. So that's something, in addition to the A&E ambulance headlines that come about, it's something else that's going to be really significant for us if we win an election. I've said that repeatedly. That's not new news. It's something that I said when I stood to be leader of the Scottish Labour Party. It was one of the 4 or 5 issues that I said would be very important. In terms of Alan's point, how do you define the middle class? Like, we'd all have a different definition, Alan, wouldn't we? But without being in any way impolite, generally speaking, generally it wouldn't be someone living in a £2 million house, but just generally. I know there'll be some people in houses worth £2 million who don't have significant monthly income. I know that. So we'll consult on just how to introduce this tax on £2 million houses across the UK. I think the starting point there is that would be an extra £250 a calendar month of payment if you're in one of those, a home with an additional £2 million. And we simply feel that combination of that and an increase in the tax for those who earn over £150,000, of whom there are 16,000 in Scotland, we think, that's a fairer way of doing it than trying to increase the number of bands or to increase the council tax more generally. It's just a sense that a lot of those people in that kind of broad middle class. Many of them are struggling, they work hard, and they already pay enough tax. So in government, my instinct and my approach will be not to increase those people's taxes, either through income tax or other taxes, including varying the bands of council tax.
Okay, more questions? Person in the front and at the back.
Hi, Jim. Ben Thompson, Reform Scotland. The taxes, as you quite rightly point out, will tend to lead to a greater degree of flow from the southeast through to Scotland, which obviously is a good thing for Scotland, one might say, but will it lead to resentment, particularly following what's happened with the referendum? And one could see, even Diane Abbott was feeling quite aggrieved by the thought of those taxes. Is that going to exacerbate the problem of what we've just been through in the last year, a feeling of England feeling that Scotland's getting too good a deal?
Okay. I'm sorry, Ben, you won't believe it. Caroline Flint, who I spoke about earlier, has just texted me. No, she's not sacking me from this job, don't worry. I'm not sure she'd want the job. Sorry. Okay, I get your point, yep.
Gentleman at the back.
My name's Derek Scott. In your busy diary, Jim, I gather you've got a meeting on Friday at Hampden Park with the Scottish Football Association,
Yep.
Police Scotland and others. By way of background, I'm a member of the Tartan Army. I go to all Scotland's home games. I go to nearly all the away games. I'm also a St Johnstone season ticket holder. I appreciate you don't drink alcohol yourself, and I think you've certainly turned up for some photo calls at some of the football clubs. I do think you should look at or speak to people who know what really goes on at football matches, Jim, because I think Police Scotland could be in a good position to comment on this. I'll give you two quick stories because you've peppered your own comments this evening with one or two personal stories. As you know, we played Celtic on Saturday in Perth.
Yeah.
12:45 kickoff.
Yep, we scored after 36 seconds.
You did. Well, I think it was 35 actually. But
I think it was 35 the game before against Partick Thistle.
38 against.
All right, okay. Anyway, we can agree it was the first. We can agree, Derek, it was in the first
It's
minute.
what happened after the game. As I walked up the hill from the ground, it was very noticeable. The crowd was only 6,700. There were bags of cans that had obviously been cast aside from the coaches coming up from Glasgow. There was quite a lot of bottles of Buckfast, which you don't usually see in Perth. There was other bottles as well.
Oh.
So I'm sorry, but I'm really kind of quite concerned about this. And then from my Tartan Army days, last year we played in Warsaw twice. Now, it's a lovely new stadium there, very high stadium. I have to say, a lot of the fans, their experience was spoiled by a few of the fans for whom the toilets were too far away, and wearing kilts has got its downsides. So I'm sorry, Jim, I don't think we're ready for it yet. I know you've said Celtic Rangers matches wouldn't apply, and I agree with you there, but I think you may have to look at a lot more matches than you're thinking of. I'm thinking particularly of games involving Celtic and particularly games involving Scotland.
Okay. All right.
Okay.
Excellent. All right. Ben's point about will this cause will it cause resentment? And obviously Boris Johnson and Diane Abbott weren't delighted by my, actually not by my proposal, by the Labour Party's policy. Seemed to catch Diane Abbott by surprise that it was the Labour Party's policy. And I thought it was not. I mean, I've not traditionally been. I mean, traditionally people would kind of put me in the New Labour camp, and would put Diane Abbott in a different camp. And to be attacked from the right by a Diane Abbott was kind of quite an unusual and discombobulating experience. But look, I don't think it caused resentment because I think a third of all of these houses that were affected by this mansion tax are in one constituency in London. And a substantial proportion of this money will be spent on the National Health Service in London. It's redistribution. Yes, it's redistribution south to north, of course it is, but it's redistribution within London as well. And I think that's pretty fair. And I'm sure we don't want a country where two of the great wealth generating cities, because this came up as part of the debate as well, because when it kicked off as a media issue, I was in Aberdeen. And I just said, look, we can't have, just in a select number of our cities, the concentration of wealth and miss everyone else out. And that's the approach. Will it lead to resentment? I'm not sure me saying that we would want to introduce a mansion tax on a few thousand houses across the UK is big an issue is as big an issue as saying we want to leave the UK. But maybe I'm wrong. Derek, your point about football, I sense I'm not going to entirely convince you. And you say I should talk to people that go to football. I go to football most weeks.
People have to clear up the mess.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, we will do on Friday. Well, here's maybe everyone hasn't followed this. What this is that I've suggested in the Scottish Football Association and most of Scotland's football clubs, probably not all, but most of Scotland's football clubs say that supporters should be allowed to drink inside the stadiums in future. We should copy what happens in England and Germany. In England, what happens is you go to a football match, and I go to quite a lot of football. This should have been to Blackpool, Bolton, Burnley, a few others, Man City, and what you do there is you can't take a drink into the stadium, and no one wants to do that. Nobody wants to do that. That's what you used to be able to do in Scotland. You can't take a drink into the stadium, and in England you cannot drink at your seat, unlike in rugby. It's against the law to drink in view of the pitch. So what we're talking about is before the game and at half time, people drinking in the concourses. Now, folks say, well, that'll add to the problems about families, and haven't we made a lot of progress in recent years? There are more families go to English football, despite there being drink, than go to Scottish football without drink. The change in football culture in this country and all across Europe, all across Britain, didn't come from any drinking ban. And anyone who says that doesn't understand the nature of what's happened in football. And I'm not saying that's your situation, Derek, but it came about because of the tragedy at Hillsborough and the Taylor Report in 1990 and the All-Seater Stadia. That's what's driven a change in culture. Look at Man City. There's breastfeeding facilities. There's face painting and jugglers as part of the entertainment. This isn't about alcohol. And I'll just finish with it because I could go on quite a length with this, and that's not why you're not here to hear me talk about this evening, but I just take a pretty straightforward view. Do we really think Scottish football supporters are any worse than English football supporters, or Germans or French or Belgians who are able to drink? In Germany, what they do is the police have the power to designate matches and say that's not one where alcohol should be available. And of course, that would be the case with Celtic and Rangers. That's not where we introduce this sort of policy. But I simply have a pretty straightforward view. We shouldn't treat all football supporters as if they're potential criminals. Those guys that you're talking about, I suspect, I don't know, most of the away supporters would be guys. The home football supporters are much more family atmosphere and a better balance in that sense. Them drinking in the way that they did, first of all, on the bus, that's illegal. That's about policing. And I think it'd be more sensible for folk being in a regulated environment with police supervision inside stadiums before the game than being what they are, what you're talking about earlier, Derek. I just don't think that we should treat today's football supporters as though we were living in 1980 when there was that terrible riot at Hampden. And I don't think we should say that Scottish football supporters are more inclined to being criminals than England football supporters, particularly when you see the terrible legacy of 1980s English football hooliganism and racism and extreme right-wing politics and all the sorts of things that traditionally went with it. I just got a better faith in our fellow Scots. It's a pretty straightforward view.
Okay, I think we've only got time for 2 more questions. The gentleman at the back left and the gentleman in the front row.
William Redmond, then you.
Hi, William.
I was just wondering, with sharing growth and prosperity, can we afford the banks and the model they're using just now? Because they seem to be going, out of bounds. Is that the right word for it?
Mm-hmm. Okay.
They keep going belly up, and we're constantly having to get them out of the position they're in.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, William.
Gentleman in the front.
Okay, Jim. Bristol Muldoon, Royal Society of Edinburgh. Really, the question I'd want to ask is in relation to the issue about economic growth.
Mm-hmm.
the UK on the whole has been declining in the amount of money we put into R&D over the last 30 years. We currently are below the likes of the USA, Germany, the United States of America, South Korea, in terms of how much we put into R&D. Scotland does a little bit better than that in terms of the public sector component of it. We do very poorly in the private sector component. How would you intend to address that?
Okay, all right. I think the main thing you can talk about there, Bristol, is partnership between private sector academia and government. You are right in saying that Scotland, well, we can do better, does disproportionately well in terms of UK university R&D per capita, really significantly. But also I think there's a kind of longer term issue here about how we treat the sciences from primary school onwards. But I think the main public policy approach would be a kind of partnership, academia, private sector and central government. And that's the approach we'd take. In terms of William's point about about banks, I think behind your point, William, is the sentiment that why should we keep bailing banks out? None of us would ever envisaged what happened envisaged having to do what happened in 2008. I remember sitting there with Alistair Dallin and Gordon Brown, and we were having the conversations about what should happen. I was the Secretary of State for Scotland at the time. Well, we just left with no choice. Do you want to do it? No. Did we have to do it? Yes. And it was the power of the UK taxpayer standing behind the Royal Bank of Scotland and others that kept it going. There's still some way to go, of course, in terms of some of the institutions. So I think it's back to this point. We had no choice and no other realistic alternative. Ed Balls has spoken about this recently, and we'll have more to say in the next few weeks about further reform in the sector. Wouldn't be for me this evening to announce that different approach. But notwithstanding, William, the kind of cultural legacy of frustration that some people have with the financial institutions when a tiny minority of the tiny minority took unwarranted risk. I don't think we should castigate an entire sector for the dreadful mistakes of a tiny minority. I don't think we do ourselves any service. I think it undermines an industry that we still have great faith in and we have great competitive advantage in. So I want us to learn from 2008 and the mistakes that built up to 2008, but to continue to celebrate the enormous success that is our financial services industry, notwithstanding your first question, and work like hell to win the affection and the custom of the growing global middle class. Because I genuinely think the best days of our financial services industry can still be ahead of us. Different regulation, different approach, but with real opportunity based upon this growth in some of the developing economies. I mean, there's no limit to what we can achieve if we just set our mind to it, I think.
I said there was only time for 2 questions, but Jim's answered those ones pretty quickly. So there is one burning question I would like to ask.
Do you know, that's the one. I've been around long enough that I meant to kind of filibuster myself. Sorry about that.
I was in London a couple of weeks ago speaking to MPs and from all the parties, and I would say that 3 of the MPs from 3 different parties are dreading the election, and 1 MP from another party was encouraging the election and couldn't get it quickly enough. Given the focus on the party in Scotland, what would you say was a good result for Labour on the 8th of May?
Save the easy ones to last. Like I've said before, that we are determined to hold all the seats that we have. I know that we're behind in the polls. I know that. We've got an enormous gap to make up. But I've said this before, the Scottish Labour Party hasn't been good enough or strong enough in recent years. I'm not kind of self-aggrandising enough to say that one person helps makes that difference. It's a big team effort. But I'm determined to turn around the Scottish Labour Party's fortunes. It's about a professionalism, but it's also about standing for something. And I want people to say, do you know what, I don't agree with that Murphy guy, but at least he stands for something. You get some sense of what the Labour Party's for. Because for a period of time, a lot of people had a really cracking idea about what the Labour Party was against. not enough of a sense of what we were for. And it's for the type of things that I've been speaking about this evening. It's part of that debate. And for me, the argument I made this evening, this is a series of 3 speeches I'm making over the next couple of weeks about the type of Scotland that I believe in. This is the type of Scotland I'm going to make an argument for in the general election and in the election in 2016 when I stand to be Scotland's First Minister. Right? Only a fool with certainty can predict each and every seat. But I'm one of those people who has never believed in either inherited power, inherited disadvantage, or inherited opinions. So at every election, I think you've got to convince the public each and every time afresh. I'm not in favour of habitual voting, I've never have been. I wouldn't hold my seat in East Renfrewshire if it was just, as Anton knows, if it was an issue of just everyone who had voted Labour always votes Labour and everyone who votes that way always votes that way. I don't have a natural Labour majority in my own constituency, but you've got to build a coalition of voters. And before any of the journalists get excited, that's different from a coalition of parties, right? Right? But you build a coalition of voters, but you got to earn that coalition. So I'm determined to hold every seat that we currently have, but that's going to require a huge amount of work. And I recognise that if the opinion polls as they are now were borne out on election day, that's not going to happen. That wouldn't happen. David Cameron would more than likely be Prime Minister if the polls in Scotland are repeated on election day. Because, as we know, since before the Second World War, actually since universal adult suffrage, the biggest party forms the government of the UK. And if the Scottish Labour Party was to lose as many seats as some of these polls predict, then that makes it much more difficult for the British Party to be the biggest party, and Mr Cameron holds on to power. So I think you'd be, as well as asking me how many seats would I fear losing, you should also ask Mr Cameron this weekend when he's up for the conference, how many seats does he want the SNP to win? Because that's one way of him holding on to power. But we'll see on election day. Actually, we'll see the morning after the election day. Okay. Anyway, thanks for that nice, easy question.
My duty to thank Jim Murphy, and I'll try and do it without insulting him this time, though I'm pleased to have been the Ernie Wise to his Eric Morecambe. So can I, on your behalf, thank Jim Murphy for his excellent speech and answer questions, and Alistair Morris for chairing the discussion. There is no alcohol ban within the ground of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, so we invite you to take a drink with us afterwards. Thank you very much indeed.